Over to you, Gina.
Thank you, Jody. Thanks very much. And I want to say thank you to you for the opportunity to gather this panel together right here, a live studio audience. We're here at Eastern Audio in St. John's, safely distanced from each other, but so happy to be in each other's company. I also want to congratulate you, Jody, and the team for pulling together such an excellent virtual conference. We've been tuning in throughout, and it's gone very well, and it's been one of the best examples we've seen of a virtual conference coming together, so well done on that. And certainly over the 2 days, we've heard much evidence and new data and experiences coming forward that point to the importance of Canada's Arctic safety and security interests, as well as the growing capability that we're seeing emerging across the country. With this panel today, we'd like to share some frontline perspectives from here, Newfoundland and Labrador, which is a vital gateway to the north. I have just a few slides that I'm going to open with to kind of set the context for the panel, and I'm then going to turn to our panelists for an armchair discussion about the current environment, our resident need and capability, and what's required to optimize and prioritize our northern assets. And I'm in control of the slides, So the first slide I wanted to share with you is really just a refresher, if you haven't heard enough about this already in the past 2 days, about the critical nature of Canada's Arctic landscape. Our Arctic represents over 40% of Canada's land mass, which is 25% of the global Arctic. It's certainly a major concern for us. Our Arctic foreign policy has 4 pillars. The first one is to protect Canada's environmental heritage, to promote economic and social development, improve and devolve northern governance, and to exercise Canada's sovereignty in the Arctic. And we certainly see that at a rate of almost twice the global average of climate change and global warming, a whole lot more activity that makes the Arctic an even higher concern for this country. We're seeing increased shipping traffic, increased search and rescue as a result, and increased scientific research. And we're going to hear a lot more about that from our panelists. In Newfoundland and Labrador, we do consider ourselves a gateway to the north, and there's a fairly deep history that points to that. Over 100 years ago, Robert Peary approached Captain Bob Bartlett to take him as an explorer to the north, and Captain Bartlett carried Peary along with many other explorers and missions up to the north, and in fact is recognized as being one of the few individuals to date with the amount of travel to the north, to the Arctic that he did. In 1927, he received the Explorers Club Medal for his Arctic expeditions and mapping of the North, and that's a great picture of him there. We certainly honor Captain Bob Bartlett here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So we have a deep history as Canada's gateway to the Arctic, and it's easy to see why. We're surrounded by the North Atlantic Ocean. There is not a soul here in Newfoundland and Labrador that doesn't feel a deep connection to the North Atlantic and to the North in general. You can't step outside without feeling the truth of that. Because we're uniquely positioned along Iceberg Alley, we are known to be one of the few, in fact, the only place in the world where people live amongst moving ice, not stationary ice, but moving ice. And our water here is colder than anywhere else in the world. So that leads us to be Canada's largest ocean economy. We have strong infrastructure and expertise here in fabrication, engineering, and big projects in harsh environments, and a supply chain to go with it. We're known to have we have an innovation hub with over 40 research facilities that are dedicated to the Arctic. We offer a lot of value to Canada's national shipbuilding strategy and certainly to the upcoming Polar Icebreaker program. We are self-described as the world's cold ocean laboratory, and for good reason. So this slide shows you nothing that you're actually going to be able to read, but it paints a great picture of the icebreaking capability globally. It was produced in 2017 by the United States Coast Guard. And what I'd like to draw your attention to is that there are 93 icebreakers that are shown on this photo, and 50% of those are in Russia. What's exceptionally notable, I think, is that there are 34 icebreakers noted on this chart as being planned or currently under construction, which will lead to an increase, a 30% increase in polar icebreaking capability around the world. And of particular note is that Canada in 2017 was noted as having a heavy polar icebreaker under construction, and the USA had intended to have one under construction. It had a plan, and of course that's flipped. The US has moved ahead with their program for the Polar Security Cutter, and Canada is we hope, about to make a decision on our heavy polar. So there is an urgent national need to deliver a new polar icebreaker by 2029. As we see the level of activity that's ramping up globally, the number of icebreakers that are about to be deployed, Canada needs a strong presence. Our current heavy icebreaker, the CCGS Louis Saint Laurent, was commissioned in 1969. I was honored to have a tour of the ship last year, and especially honored that the captain of the Louis is here with us today. I'll introduce him in just a minute. The Louis is our only heavy polar icebreaker, and in just a few years it's going to enter its 6th decade of service, which means we're in pretty risky business continuing to rely on that ship for our ability to get as far north for as long in the season as we currently do through the work of the Louis Saint Laurent. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to today's panel. Dr. Claude Daly is a professor in the Ocean and Naval Architecture Engineering program at Memorial University and has been working in the area of cold ocean engineering for 40 years. He's led several large Arctic shipping research projects at Memorial and was recently awarded the Davidson Medal by the Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers, known as SNAME, for outstanding contributions to ship research. Claude has also taught a lot of our engineers who are working here in Canada and abroad in those related fields. Claude is going to provide his perspective on our Canadian capability and presence in the Arctic, which he describes as our own backyard. Peter Woodward is President and CEO of Woodward Group of Companies, which is based in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador. The Woodward Group of Companies is a diversified family-owned business that has been providing marine services in the transportation of freight, passengers, and fuel within Newfoundland and Labrador and the Canadian Arctic since 1960. The Woodward Group employs in excess of 800 people in Newfoundland and Labrador. Peter is going to provide his insight on the importance of accessing shipping routes as a vital service to northern communities. Dr. Rob Greenwood is the Associate Vice President, Public Engagement and External Relations at Memorial University. And if that's not quite enough for him to do during the day, he's also Director of the Leslie Harris Center of Regional Policy and Development at Memorial. The Harris Center's mandate is to coordinate and facilitate Memorial's educational, research, and outreach activities in the areas of regional development and public policy. I've known Rob for quite some years, and I can tell you that he is well known and a frequently turned to expert voice on Newfoundland and Labrador's regional economic and community-based issues and interests. He's going to discuss the national and regional economic considerations of a Canadian presence in the north. And finally, Captain Jim Schmiel. I was pleased to meet Jim for the first time just last week during my tour of his ship, the CCGS Louis Saint Laurent, of which Jim is commanding officer. As noted, the Louis Saint Laurent is the Canadian Coast Guard's largest icebreaker. Jim has been with the Canadian Coast Guard for over 37 years and has been captain for 20 years on various Coast Guard vessels. He's completed many, many voyages to the Arctic, having sailed in the Eastern Arctic, Beaufort Sea, Arctic Ocean, and numerous transits through the Northwest Passage. His first Arctic voyage was in 1986 on board the CCGS Sir John Franklin. He's also seen a lot of polar bears. Jim will provide insight into Canada's Arctic seaways and why the CCGS Louis Saint Laurent and other Canadian icebreakers are in increasingly high demand. Gentlemen, we have about 45 to 50 minutes to discuss 11 questions or so. 3 of you are here in the room with me, and Peter is joining us online from Labrador. So I'd like to leave some room for audience engagement at the end, so I'll remind each of you to please keep your responses as brief as possible. You all have received the questions, and I know you're well prepared, so let's just jump right into it. So I'm going to start with round one of the questions is all to do with the current environment. And I'd like to start with Peter and Jim. Peter, I'll begin with you. Paint us a picture. From a ship's perspective, how have ice conditions changed in the Arctic over the past 5 to 10 years? And how's that changing environment affecting the mission of your vessels?
I think that most people would assume that because of global warming and the thermal effect that we have on water in the Arctic, that the ice conditions are getting less severe. And to a certain degree, I guess that's true, but to another degree, it's far from being true. What we're seeing is we've seen more glacier ice coming off of the glaciers. And we're subsequently facing multi-year ice, which is the most severe ice that we face. And if the winds are in the wrong direction, it makes it extremely difficult to access the communities that are on the eastern side of Baffin Island, and even difficult to access Hudson Bay when it comes to getting through the glacier ice that packs along the coast. Last year, we even had an incident where there was a large piece of ice that dislodged from the polar cap and drifted down into Queen Maud Sound and made moving in and out of the Western Arctic very, very difficult.
Jim, are you seeing the same? Are you seeing that the ice conditions are in fact getting more intense versus lightening?
I think overall it's probably lightening compared, probably not even 5 and 10 years, but maybe over a 20-year period. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of localized areas, depending on the season, in which ice conditions are as difficult as they were in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. I was at Hudson Bay, I think, in 2017, and we were there for most of my shift, escorting ships. There's a lot more multi-year ice, old ice. Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago by Resolute, there was a lot of ice in the entire area. Peel Sound, Northwest Passage was blocked with multi-year ice. Mm-hmm. And that's the unpredictability of the Arctic nowadays. Is you may have open water, but there's just so many areas where you can have very difficult ice, and with more shipping, cruise ships, passenger ships.
Are you seeing more traffic in the Arctic? And as you've talked to me recently about making your way through the Northwest Passage, what are you seeing? What kind of activity are you seeing up there?
I see a lot more, I guess, cruise ships and pleasure craft, and something that was unthinkable in the 80s, coming through the Northwest Passage would be 9/10 or 10/10 ice coverage. Mm-hmm. Probably in 2017, I was proceeding Northwest Passage, and I passed 2 sailing vessels, 50-foot, heading south, which you wouldn't even comprehend 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And of course, if they need assistance, there's more of them, and it could actually call us out for search and rescue, which then diverts us from our mission at the time, which then creates a shortfall for the mission we were doing at the time. So, but I do see more and more, cruise ships and yacht-type vessels in the Arctic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a sign of increasing activity.
Because of the accessibility,
right?
Except if with the weather, if there's a lot of ice in a certain area, they may not be as prepared as, say, the commercial mariners, because it's unpredictable. It's not a great spot to be if you're not prepared, especially in a 50-foot sailing vessel. Mm-hmm.
So you've been doing cruises up north. You've been on missions up north, I should say, not so much cruises, I guess, even though some of the ships are quite lovely. It's a lot has changed over the past 3 decades, hasn't it?
For sure, yes.
Yeah.
Just from the ice conditions, as Peter said, people think with global warming, climate change, that it's all free passage now, but it's not. Each year there seems to be localized areas that are very difficult. But overall the ice conditions have allows transit for most parts of the Arctic that before were only accessible through icebreakers and ice-strengthened vessels. But nowadays, you may actually, I think last year I ended up in Resolute without seeing any ice except glacier ice.
Okay.
There's no actually sea ice from St. John's to Resolute area.
Okay. Claude, I'm going to go to you next. You've been working, teaching, and conducting research in Arctic-related fields for 40 years. How would you describe Canada's current presence in the Arctic?
I've been wondering about how to answer that question. Our presence in the Arctic is not that great when you really think about it. It's, you know, the number of Canadians that can name a geographic feature in the Arctic, probably almost everybody could name the Northwest Passage. That's a given. Name anything else. Most Canadians couldn't name anything else. They wouldn't know where, they might have heard of Hudson Bay, but would they know where Lancaster Sound is? Probably not. Would they be able to name the islands? Probably not. Canada doesn't have a very big presence in the Arctic. There are 200,000 permanent residents in our Arctic, but it's a huge territory. And it's not like going to Greenland. It's not as developed. It is a very maritime sort of region. It's islands and coastlines. On a very personal level, my presence in the Arctic has been non-existent for the last 30 years. I was there every year in the early 80s. Every single year I went to the Arctic. But from the mid-80s on, I haven't been. Now, it's a question of opportunities. It's not easy to get to the Arctic for most people. You know, from what I see, the people that go for specific purposes. They may live there, or there's a specific economic opportunity. But when looked at on the level of Canada, our presence in the Arctic is kind of minimal, and it's seasonal, and you know, somewhat reluctant. And I don't think that's the way it should be. So anyway,
You think there should be more? More. Who should be up there more?
Well, I think the world's about to go up there. And we, I think, are, it's our backyard, but we're more interested in our front yard somehow. We tend to look south, not north, right? I think the world is about to start using the Arctic Ocean as a commercial highway, and it could be quite overwhelming. And I don't see that we're ready. I think, as was said, you know, the ice conditions are changing, and we're seeing more glacial ice and the like. The eastern Arctic is facing all this influx of multi-year and eastern glacial ice into the, you know, Baffin Bay and the like. The central Arctic basin, if you look at it over time, the age of the ice and the amount of ice in it is diminishing kind of shockingly. And the central Arctic basin may soon be opened up. Now, it may not be, but the trends are, when you look on a sort of 20-year scale, the trends are pretty overwhelming. So I think the world's going to start to go north. I mean, the Chinese aren't building icebreakers for nothing. The Koreans aren't building icebreakers for nothing, I know. And yet, I don't know, we've been kind of blasé about it, I think. So.
Okay, thank you. Rob, let's hear from you. As I stated earlier, Memorial is a recognized international leader in cold ocean and Arctic teaching and research across many disciplines. And Newfoundland and Labrador is home to more than 40 labs and research facilities focused on the ocean, Arctic, and harsh environment research and technology development. Why? Why is Newfoundland and Labrador such a hub for this activity?
Well, I think riffing off some of what Claude said, you know, the front yard, backyard comparison is a good one. For Newfoundland and Labrador, it makes sense. We're the farthest south you can go and be in the north. When I swim off Old Perlican, where my mom's from, in the summer, you kind of regret having that Arctic temperature water. But for researchers and for people involved in industry, the ocean industries in Newfoundland and Labrador have always been connected to the north. And my own work I compared Newfoundland and northern Norway for my PhD research. And there's been a long tradition of researchers, social sciences, physical sciences at Memorial, looking at the north, being in the north, working with Indigenous peoples. I think the social sciences side of this is equally important. For decades, MUN biology, engineering, math, computer science have been producing people working in the sector. When the Marine Institute became part of MUN, and then Seacorps has evolved over the years, there's this amazing, and we all know universities are critical to the knowledge economy, and that applies to every sector. And we recently had a couple of researchers from the U of T, the Monk Center Innovation Policy Lab, so it's got to be true, who looked at MI and they looked at C-Core as mechanisms, vehicles on how you connect university research with the needs of industry. And they said they were both leaders in the country, underappreciated, and we'll talk about that more later, I think. And so I think that whole university presence connecting with industry, we branded Memorial in the last number of years around our Coasts Initiative, Cold Oceans and Arctic Science Technology Society. Loads of good work across Canada, in the north, in oceans. But if it's cold ocean, Arctic, ice, the kind of work Claude's been doing for years and his colleagues. I'd also mention, and we do need to give some credit, governments actually have done a good job in this area. In Newfoundland Labrador, the NRC facility, the federal and provincial governments have consistently funded in this area. City of St. John's, now Holyrood with the Marine Institute Holyrood Marine Base. And there's been leadership, and I can name a whole bunch of names, and I won't for sake of time, but happy to go back to it. But real leaders within governments, within community, certainly within the university. We've had mechanisms like Genesis, which recently with the supercluster has an ocean startup program that's really advancing things. And in the end, of course, it all culminates with the private sector. And we have a couple of people here in our panel, yourself and Peter, who live and breathe it. And we can all name a bunch of the firms and business leaders. And Harris Center did a study recently. We are an ocean cluster. And the supercluster helps supercharge that. But it's developed over 20, 30, 40, and throughout our history, in fact.
Thank you. So the current environment shows that we need to be there, and we have the capability from which to grow to be there. So I'm going to switch gears into round 2 of questions now, and I want to talk about why this all matters. Why does the Arctic matter here to Canada? And Rob, I want to stay with you for a few minutes. Can you just tell us a little bit more about why northern and Arctic seaways are important to Newfoundland and Labrador as well as Canada's national interests? So we have all of that activity going on that you described. There's a lot happening. Why does that matter from a sovereignty, from a security, from an economic, from a community point of view? Why is that so important to us?
Well, it's come up already in the discussion in 2 words, climate change. I think, and Harris Center has just launched a new initiative, Forecast NL, Climate, Economy, and Society in Newfoundland and Labrador. And it's going to be critical for us to look at the links between environmental change, economic risks and opportunities, cultural risks and opportunities. MUN has just launched the School of Arctic and Subarctic Studies in Happy Valley Goose Bay, where Peter is. And we're creating a campus there. And our partnership with Nunavut Arctic College is all because this is absolutely essential on the environmental, the cultural, the economic. If you haven't read the Canadian Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, released in 2019, you need to. It really is all about how we have to improve the standard of living and potential for economic development in the North. It calls for investments in transportation and infrastructure. Arctic safety and security is central to all this. And as Claude mentioned, it's a massive territory. So the kind of monitoring capacity that C-Core specializes in is absolutely essential. And the more activity that happens, the more risks of potential incidents. So there's all kinds of areas that have to be beefed up, and the military, the Coast Guard is going to be critical of that. So there's loads of opportunities dealing with the risks as well as seizing and advancing the opportunity. And MUN has a bunch of new areas in that, as well as building on previous, which again I can go on about, but I think that really is where I'd start.
I really want to ask what happens if we don't, but maybe when we get to the third question, you'll be able to touch on that. Jim, over to you again. As captain of Canada's largest icebreaker, can you tell us about your ship's missions? What are the kinds of things that you're doing, and how easy is it or difficult is it for you to meet current demand?
Some of the things we do oceanographic mapping of the seafloor. One was for the Canada's territorial claim under UNCLOS. We also do it every year for Canadian Hydrographic Services to better chart out the Arctic. We assist in sea lift and the safe transport of commercial ships to resupply the Arctic communities. Of course, we're called to search and rescue missions. We're called to environmental response missions. Sovereignty. I've been in the Arctic for, I guess, 3 decades on and off. And many, many decades before me, Canadian Coast Guard has been in the Arctic. And just at present, I think it's critical for the sovereignty that we have in there. But as far as, the safe transport of ships, resupplying the communities, and from a shipboard or ship operator's perspective, I guess for me, we have more and more demands. Our mandates that stay the same. If anything, it's expanded with the creation of a new Arctic region, more tasks. But I guess the ship's captain is pretty simple: is they give me a job to do, and we do it. But I do see more and more demands where we may be doing Canadian hydrographic work, but there's also demand for an ice escort, which is also a demand for search and rescue. So you go to search and rescue call, then you go back to something else. But basically, from my perspective, I think we're still doing a good job, and we're maintaining the tasks we're giving. We're still carrying them out and meeting our levels of service.
Right.
But
I noticed last week when we did the tour of your ship that there seemed to be as many bunks for scientists and those who travel with you as there were for the crew. I'm sure that's not quite accurate, but there was a lot of capacity for supporting science missions. Is that something you've seen increase in recent years?
we've seen the joint ocean ice study that's done in the Beaufort Gyra has been ongoing for I think 20 years now, and we always bring up every summer normally 30 plus scientists. That happens every year. There's other demands for other science work on ongoing, I guess, opportune basis. But I've seen, the UNCLOS has been on, or not the UNCLOS, the JOICE program has been ongoing for many, many years. And there are other demands, and I see increased Canadian CHS work for setting up tide gauges through the Arctic has been increasing for sure. But then on top of that, we have to balance that with the other demands for such as Arctic resupply, because as Peter said earlier, there's still a lot of ice in the Arctic, and it's still difficult. And
so there's a lot to do.
There's a lot to do.
Yeah. So Peter, back to you. You're in the business of getting critical goods to northern communities, and I know that you often have to rely on icebreakers to break the path for you to get there. I think you had an incident about a decade ago when you had to wait 10 days for an icebreaker to come along and get you through to Iqaluit. Can you tell us more about this and what it means for your ability to do your job and get to those northern communities?
Well, Gina, we have a fleet of 4 tankers. We carry, they're all ice strengthened tankers, but none of them are ice breaking tankers. They can handle single year ice, probably up to a couple of feet thick, but they're not going to handle any glacier ice or multi-year ice that's of any thickness whatsoever. And, the most critical thing for these Arctic communities is energy. If we don't get the fuel to those communities, and a lot of those communities were put there for sovereignty purposes. Some of them have been there for a long time, but a lot of them have been established for sovereignty purposes. And these people are relying on the gasoline and diesel that we bring to their communities, not only for transportation, they rely on it for their air access when it comes to their jet fuel. They rely on it for their heating purposes. They rely on it for their electricity. And, you think about if we don't get it in, if they don't get their groceries in, or they can fly them in. If they don't get their construction materials in, they can delay their construction for a year. If they don't get their vehicles in there, well, they could probably get by for a year. If they don't get their fuel in there, it's a major crisis, and one of the Western communities, fortunately it wasn't one of the ones that we supply, last year didn't get their fuel in, and they had to fly it in. Fortunately, it was a very small community, and the cost of flying it in was probably $3 or $4 a liter. And but that's not even practical. You look at the 200 million liters that we move into the Canadian Arctic every year. You're never going to fly 200 million liters of fuel into the communities that we service as far as Cambridge Bay, that you could get to the point where if the fuel doesn't get in there and you don't have a way of getting it there during the winter months, then you're basically going to be forced to abandon the community and take the people out. It's a big issue, and the Coast Guard's been very good to us, and I know that their resources are stretched. Many times we've called for the Coast Guard, and their priority is SAR, search and rescue, and sometimes they've had scientific missions. They do their best job that they can for us with the resources, and I don't think we'd get by without them. But it's important to recognize how important that fuel is to those communities. They can't exist year round, and a lot of people talk about alternate energy. They talk about solar. They talk about wind, and I think all of the carbon-free energies are wonderful, but you're not going to do it in the Canadian Arctic when you've got 6 months of darkness, so there's not going to be any solar. And we haven't found a way to store wind yet. So, those communities are going to be relying on carbon fuels for quite a long time to come.
Peter, what happens as traffic increases? What happens to those communities and their needs for supplies? Should we expect to see that increase? Well,
the adventure tourism thing is going to drive a lot more traffic into the Arctic, and we've been doing the Arctic since the 80s, and I think the people, mostly Newfoundlanders that we have on our ships, are well suited to that environment. They enjoy it. They're experienced. We have experienced seamen, but as the captain of the Louis will tell you, that we have a lot of people who haven't had the experience that they probably need, and they take a lot of resources when it comes to the search and rescue function that he's required to do. And subsequently, because that search and rescue thing gets first priority, things like fuel tankers are left to wait. And we have a very short season, and we're expected to deliver it in a timely and economical way. And when we wait, it increases costs, and it increases the threat of communities not getting fuel.
Claude, I'm going to come back to you. This province is often described as the path or the gateway to the Arctic. In the past, you've said that Newfoundland and Labrador is at the cutting edge of what is happening in the world, and we're setting the agenda for Arctic and ice research. Is there more that Canada should be doing to optimize our strategic position?
Yeah, I mean, picking up on some things Rob said, what he was saying, I agree with 100%. There's this community of focus on ocean and harsh environment Arctic issues here in St. John's. That's why I'm here. And so we're a gateway to the Arctic, although it's more of an expertise gateway than, we are also physically closer, but lots of people come and go from the Arctic without coming through, St. John's. We're not a physical, entry point per se, but we are an expertise entry point. I've had people who, I got a phone call from Houston saying there's a group coming. They're from, I've had it both from Korea and from Singapore. They want to know about Arctic things. They came to Houston. We told them, get on a plane and get up to St. John's. And they did. And they came up to visit people here. They came up to visit me. They come to see Pecore, to come and, see people. We have expertise that the world knows we have. Where I think Canada, there's something missing in our network that I see in other countries. I've lived in Finland, and I see how they do it. I'm in touch with Norwegians a lot, and I see how they do it. And we have really good core science. We have really good applied engineering research. And then we've got commercial activities that are sometimes quite vibrant, but we don't knit them all together. And it's frustrating that we don't knit them all together. I wish we would. I wish, and I see progress. I think our community, this is one example, this conference is one example of a venue to pull our community together from government side, provincial, federal, local, but also different industry groups, service sector, equipment sector, shipbuilding, and tie that in with university research and consultancies and really have a community. And I've long felt that I visit Norway or Finland, and I see how much that they all know each other and they're all intertwined, and I see us as somewhat silos. Now those silos are coming together, but we need to work at that because it's in all our interests that we find more ways that we each sort of benefit each other and that things flow from one to the other. Whatever our priorities are, that'll be better, whatever our priorities are, to work that way. Yeah?
So that's a good segue to the third round of questions, which is about resourcing our presence in the Arctic. And we've spoken about that need to have the baseline capability, and you're talking about the integration of everything that we do. You've also spoken about the need to keep talent here, and you've seen a drain of talent, educated, building their experience base here, and then going elsewhere. And you've said that we need to keep them. Tell me more about that.
Well, and that picks up on what I've just said, that what I see is that we have these opportunities that are short-term opportunities, and they attract a lot of people. And a lot of people are interested in Arctic engineering or something like that. And then the opportunity goes away and it diminishes. And it's because I think our whole system is not mature enough. There are not enough connections in it that it binds it together and keeps it through the low spots. I think something like a big Icebreaker program is something that is long-term and can tie a lot of people into its challenges, whether they're social challenges, economic challenges, technical challenges, equipment challenges, and it sort of gives a focal point. But I think we also need a national priority. The Finns decided in the probably late 60s, early 70s, that Finland was no longer going to be cut off in the winter. And in the 60s and before, Finland was essentially an island that you could only get to by ship, economically, right? They didn't ship through Russia, And they decided in the early 70s that they were going to keep all their ports, all of them, open year-round. And, it's a big ask to say that Canada should be in the Arctic year-round. But why not? Why not? The people are there year-round. Why aren't we there? Why aren't our ships there year-round? Right?
So I'm going to come back to you on that before we conclude this panel. But Rob, I want to go to you next because we've got a good link here to what Claude is saying. Do we know how good we are in this country? Are we doing enough to leverage our own expertise, to blow our own horn, to stand up as other nations are also standing up to say, well, look at what's happening up there. Maybe we need to get there. Are we doing enough to optimize our own presence?
No. And Claude and I didn't compare notes before this session. We see each other maybe once a year, but the synergies are real. Part of the problem is we don't know ourselves all the great things we're doing. We're all busy. We're specialized. We know our immediate contacts. So that's part of the problem. Also, we know in Newfoundland Labrador, historically, we did have an inferiority complex. After Canada joined us in 1949. Historically, David Alexander did great work at MUN 50 years ago on all this. We had low literacy levels, the nature of our development historically. We lacked a strong democracy. People were too deferential to authority. Memorial, again, and I'm a booster here, has had a massive impact on that. Our leadership in this province, business, health, education, even in government, has improved dramatically. But I especially think our students who have graduated in the last 20 years, and especially in the last 10 or so years during the boom, are a different breed altogether. There is no inferiority complex anymore in that group, that generation. Our grads had exposure to world-class exports, experience, networks, supply chains. They have swagger. And they're finding opportunities with firms like yours and a whole bunch of others. But we need to communicate amongst ourselves way better. Sessions like this are great because it also then is externally. What Memorial did with coasts. We had people like Claude and his colleagues doing this work for decades. But for the most part, not bragging about it. When we developed coasts, cold oceans, and Arctic, science, technology, and society, I did 212 meetings over 3 years in Ottawa. And I'm a half-inch deep, 8 miles wide. But I know Claude exists, and I can brag about what he's doing, and the Marine Institute, and Seacor. And every meeting, there's no conspiracy against us in Ottawa, but they're not near us. They don't, their front door is south, not in the North Atlantic like us. And every word there was follow-up on, gee, we got to learn about that. And we didn't go begging or demanding our fair share. We went bragging. And we did our homework and found out what their departmental plans were and aligned what we could offer to help them achieve their mandates. And the response was amazing. We landed the Ocean Frontier Institute. The supercluster wouldn't have landed without that. A whole bunch of units across MUN are hitting home runs every week, every month. Part of our problem is you can't keep up to it all. And we also did deal with the issue of Atlantic Canada, because Halifax and St. John's, Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, sucking up to the federal government, get over it. The world doesn't care if St. John's and Halifax or MUN and Dal compete. We all have strengths. Let's market it together. And Newfoundland and Labrador doesn't have to play second fiddle to anyone. We can partner from a position of strength. And I think we're starting to get there. We have a ways to go.
So Newfoundland and Labrador has a lot to offer, especially around our research facilities, our academic institutions. We can create talent. I want to go back over to you now, Jim, and talk about the talent, availability of talent and recruitment. Again, something else that you and I talked about was how many young people are raising their hands to join the Coast Guard, to go to the Arctic. Do they have the interest? Tell us about that from your perspective.
I guess, speaking from my own experience, I joined the Coast Guard at 17, and 38 years later, I'm still here. I think it's a great opportunity, great career, great experience. I have nothing but good to say for my entire time there. And yeah, we do have a Canadian Coast Guard College in Sydney, which provides us with Marine officers, engine room, and deck department. But the ship is not only officers, it's the crew, the deckhands, the oilers, the galley staff, and yeah, we're getting some young people, and it's and everyone that joins seems to really enjoy it. But it's getting, I guess, more difficult with more opportunities around for people, social media, the connectivity, which we do have connectivity in the Arctic, but it's not the same as down south. So that's a struggle, I'm sure, for our recruitment division, but so far I think we're hanging in.
So there's new priorities with the younger generation, but going back to what Claude was saying, it should be of greater education and greater awareness. When people are making their career choices, there is this massive opportunity and need that exists in the Arctic. Peter, I want to go back to you and ask more about the infrastructure needs. What would you say are priority needs, whether it's skills or infrastructure in the north, in the Arctic areas where you have a presence?
I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I'd say it's both. There is no infrastructure in the north. There are no docks. We run into constant problems because we can't we have to use the beach in all the communities, and often the beach is clogged with ice, which is in very shallow water, and subsequently it's moving around. And so we've had experiences where we've been waiting for weeks for the ice to move off the beach with the tidal effects. People don't realize that. When you live in the south, you think that there's a dock on every port, but there are no docks in the Arctic. The only dock in the Arctic is one that was built by a mining company that isn't even in a community. They're building one in Iqaluit now. They haven't finished it yet, and we'll wait and see how the success is on that. But there is no infrastructure in the Arctic. We're constantly spending money there, but I don't think we spend it very wisely. I don't see a whole lot of innovation when it comes to spending money in the north. If people talk about alternate energies for the north, but nobody talks about conservation. I go through Arctic communities. I see homes that are poorly insulated with bad windows and things like that. And I'm sort of saying you're looking for then all of a sudden you see a bunch of consultants from the south come up and they talk about alternate energies, winds and solar and things like that. And you look at the houses and you say, a little insulation and a few good windows will go a lot further than what you're actually talking about. You know, you talk about ships. The Finns developed double-acting tankers 30 years ago that could access our Arctic quite easily on a year-round basis. We've never ever done anything with that. You know, we could be accessing Western crude through Manitoba using the Finnish technology, but we don't even have to develop our own. It's sitting there, but I don't see a whole lot of that going on. So, you know, we're a lot of words, not a lot of action. And, you know, it's quite sad for the people that are up there because there are tremendous opportunities for growth and economy in the Arctic in a very environmentally friendly manner. Currently we have coal mines, we've had lead zinc mines. There's a lot of wealth in the Arctic that can be developed in an appropriate manner. But you know, every time somebody was, I don't know if we want to do that. And so there are a lot of words and a lot of, I don't mean to shit on consultants, but there's a lot of money paid to do feasibility studies and consultants, but I don't see a whole lot of actual work happening.
So since we're talking about spending money, let's talk about a new polar icebreaker. Claude, I'm going to come back to you and hopefully have a little bit of time to have others join as well. Canada is set to make a decision on the construction of the next heavy polar icebreaker, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that we're a little bit behind the game on that. I mentioned at the start that the U.S. has leapt ahead of our intentions to build a new heavy polar icebreaker. The U.S. also has an aging icebreaker fleet, and they've initiated their polar security cutter program, and there's some urgency now for Canada to do the same. The Louis, we hope, will get several more years of life, but it's time to make a decision if we want a replacement heavy polar icebreaker to be in the water by the end of this decade. In your view, how important, based on everything that you've talked about, the need for more presence in the Arctic, for more people to be up there, for more understanding of what our needs are there, how important is it for a replacement polar icebreaker to Canada?
I think I'm having some microphone problems, so I hope you can hear me. Is that all right?
Do we have a thumbs up?
Yeah?
Yes, we're good. Thank you.
Good. I see, you know, a heavy polar icebreaker as being, that's like the ticket to get in the game. I mean, this is, you know, if you can't go there, if there's a problem, if you can't go whenever you want, not just when the season allows you, if you can't go and deal with what's coming, you can't even play. And for the government to have a heavy polar icebreaker, I mean, it's like step one, because the kinds of ships that Peter might have are not going to be that level. The kinds of, you know, cruise ships that are going to be there are not going to be that level. But we need one vessel that's capable of practically anything, so that it represents a sort of a baseline, and everything else is kind of relative to that. You know, if something happens in the Arctic, and I think things are about to happen, you know, internationally, the Chinese are going to be up there, or the world's going to be up there. Canada has to have a way of going whenever we want to go. And so I see that, you know, polar icebreaker. It's not the solution to everything. It's just the beginning. But it's like the crucial beginning. The infrastructure issues that Peter was talking about, they're real, and they should be an embarrassment. And what Rob was saying about the expertise, we've got the expertise. We don't have to rely on, you know, as much as I like the Finns and the Danes and the Norwegians, and I have, you know, Korean friends, Chinese friends, they know their stuff, but we know our stuff. In fact, I'd say we know it better. But, you know, we need to go and do it, you know. We need to make it a priority. And I think the heavy icebreaker is like, it's like step one. So
I'll look to my other panelists. Any other comment on that?
I'm with him.
Good. Ditto that. Okay. Peter? You see, sorry, Jim. Yeah.
No, being Captain of the Louis,
Yeah.
I think we're fulfilling our mandate as we speak with the Louis. It's an old ship, but she operates really, really well. A lot of credit to the crew on board. The government of Canada has put a lot of money into it since the extensions of the building of the ship. And you were on board this vessel, and it's an amazing ship for a 50-year-old ship. Our downtime is very, during the Arctic season, we fulfill mandate, whether search and rescue, whether there's icebreaking. So I think we're still doing a good job in Louis, but I get your point.
It's an important ship. It's an important vessel that we continue to have the capability.
And it's operating well, and then we have funding going forward until the replacement. And they've got funding up until this time from the previous date of the replacement. So I just want to make that known.
It takes a long time, of course, to build an icebreaker, to design and build.
Yeah, virtual ships don't break ice, I've heard before.
Right, exactly. We try, but they don't work so well. Peter, last word to you.
I think it's an absolute necessity that we have a heavy polar icebreaker. I would love to see some innovation when we look at a new icebreaker that's going to suit the communities. We constantly have issues with harbor breakouts and things like that. The Louis draws a lot of water. It makes it very difficult for it to get into some of the harbors that are up there and do an effective job of opening the harbor for commercial shipping and the supplies that go in the community. So I would love to see some sort, and you can't, they have helicopters for moving around and things like that, but it would be awesome that we develop some technology or some innovation that would allow access to the beaches or to docks so that commercial ships can not just get to the community, but actually manage to discharge the fuel and supplies that they have.
I think our imaginations can all go to work. Every time I hear you speak, Peter, and talk about that there are no wharves or docks, there are beaches. And when you start to imagine the transfer of goods and fuel in that kind of environment and the rigging up that has to be done, it's easy it's easy and I guess a little bit awe-inspiring to imagine what has to be done there, not to mention having to break through the ice to even get to those regions. So I want to thank all of you. I'm going to wrap up, I guess, our comments as a panel, and then we will see how the question period will work if we have questions coming in. I'd like to say thank you not only to our sponsors, to Hedl and C-SPAN and Genoa, of course, for making the space for this conversation to happen, but to our panelists. This conversation clearly is incredibly important to our country. As we heard today, the activity in the Arctic is increasing. The mission demands are increasing, and our economic and environmental, certainly climate change conditions, are evolving. We need to keep our focus on the Arctic as a country, now more than ever. We need decisions by our leaders, by our governments that ensure that the assets that we have and the resources that we need continue to have a strong presence in the Canadian, that we need in order to have a strong presence in the Canadian Arctic. As you heard here today, we have a commitment, the commitment of Canadians to deliver, and certainly the commitment right here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we wanted to bring you that view from here. This conference is often hosted right here. There is a very large and deep pool of talent and expertise, and we wanted to share a little bit of that with you. So on that note, I will say thank you, and I think I have a question that has just come in. Okay, so the questions are going to come from me. So I'll put it out to somebody from our panel, not identified. The questioner has not identified who. They say, we speak about missions to and projects in the north, but as we know, we have a large community who live in the Arctic year-round. What can we learn from these northern communities, and how can we better work together?
Well, I could tell you we could do a lot better job just listening to them. The people that live up there in the conditions that they live in are no one knows about life in the north as well as they do, and their struggles are real. And I really think that we often come up with southern solutions and try and apply them to the north versus listening to the people that are actually up there.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And I have another question directed to Captain Schmiel. Have you had any experience with collaborating with Russia or any other Arctic nations? And if so, what worked well, and were there areas that need better interoperability?
Personally, no interaction with Russia or Russian vessels. I have traveled a few times internationally representing Canada on Arctic Councils or IMO. During the, prior to me being commanding officer of the Louis, when they were mapping out the ocean floor for Canada's claim under UNCLOS, they were working with other ships at the same time, including the Americans, and sharing data. But it's not something that happens on a regular basis from a ship point.
I'll extend the person's question. Do you see it happening? Do you see the need?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Any collaboration will be helpful,
Yeah.
depending on the mission, mission, location, reason, and I'm sure it will as the Arctic becomes more wide open and is defined better, where the routes are and who owns what.
As we see more flags flying.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that seems to be it for our questions. Again, I want to thank each of you for coming out and doing this with me today, and much appreciation as well to Acada and to MASS for making the opportunity. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jody.